Hello, everybody. My name is Jamie Henry. I will further introduce myself in a second, but I wanted to do some of the housekeeping things. I know that we always want to say a big thank you to all of you for joining us for these Mama Colleague conversations. We also want to say a thank you to the Missouri Humanities Council for helping support a number of the programs that we do. And I also want to thank Linda Endersby for being our Zoom guru to help us run all of these meetings as smoothly as they do. I'm gonna get going in a second, but I don't know if there's one scheduled for next month, but we're trying to do these once a month. And if there's ever a topic that you're thinking of, feel free to reach out to the board and we can try and coordinate a presentation. I know that's something that we're still hoping to do. So yeah, so today I get to go back in time a little bit like we usually do. But this is a project that was very special to me because it was it's probably the biggest project that I had done to this date. And I have a habit of leaving positions before the exhibits actually go in. And so I got to see it cross the finish line from the stands as opposed to on the team. So I'm Jamie Henry. I am the site superintendent for the First Missouri State Capitol State Historic Site. Previously, I was the assistant director for the Missouri State Museum, and I will let my other colleagues introduce themselves in any particular order.
I guess I'll go next. I'm Tiffany Patterson, and I'm the director of the Missouri State Museum.
I'm Sophie Grus. I'm the curator of exhibits for the Missouri State Museum.
And I'm Kate Owens, the curator of collections for the State Museum.
So this presentation, we kind of have an outline, but we really have kind of embraced the conversation part of this because that's usually how we do these types of things. But what we're going to be talking about is a couple things, but most importantly, the two newest, I guess there is a new exhibit now because you have the flag conservation exhibit, but two of the newest big exhibits at the State Museum right now, a bicentennial timeline, and then the newest exhibit, Missouri Trailblazers. So this was a little bit different. And when I had come up with the idea to see if we wanted to talk about this, something that came up was the concept of anniversary fatigue. And so we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I'm going to let Tiffany kind of set the stage for everything leading up to the two newest exhibits. And let me pull up this PowerPoint, which I don't think we need, but I will pull it up now. So Tiffany, if you want to give a little bit of background.
Sure. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Missouri State Museum. I know our staff is and Linda is, but when Linda was director, maybe before even the director before Linda, the State Museum put together a very large Civil War exhibit for the Sesquicentennial. And when I came on board, that one was getting ready to come off and we were preparing for kind of the next, that's really distracting. There we go. The next kind of thing. And what was next was the anniversary of World War I. And because the Missouri State Museum started out as the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall, we did feel very strongly that we needed to do something to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the First World War, because it was part of our purview, something that we, that was really part of our original mission. So, but after that, it was kind of like, ugh, we are not only anniversaried out, we're warred out. And so we thought of this thing of like, well, what's next? But unfortunately, the very next thing after World War I is the Missouri Bicentennial. And so we had to really think about what we wanted to do to commemorate the Bicentennial, but also do two things. One, not necessarily tell stories that other people were better able to tell. For example, we knew that the Missouri Humanities Council was working on a large exhibit on the Missouri Compromise, and that the state archives was looking at early statehood documents. So we didn't want to like do something that other people would do better. And we also wanted something to give us some breathing space, because that World War I exhibit lasted 3 years, but it was also, for as large as it was, a lot of work and a lot of research and writing and rotations. And we wanted to have an exhibit that would kind of fit with the broad theme of the bicentennial, but at the same time, give us some breathing room to do some other planning. And so we kind of came up with this idea of pioneers, like Missouri pioneers, and not just like early people settling the state, but pioneers in literature, pioneers in science, and that morphed into I'm sorry, I'm reading Kate's chats at the same time. And so that kind of morphed into what can we do to extend this, still be related to the bicentennial, but have an exhibit that wouldn't be old when the bicentennial celebration ended. And that's kind of where we are today. Is that enough background, Jamie?
Yeah, and so basically, to kind of build off what Tiffany said, the anniversary problem that we were running into was the previous two exhibits had been kind of, I don't want to say forced, but they were definitely like led in the direction of those. And then we had an absolute begin and end date, especially for World War One. And then following up, the next exhibit, like she said, had to be related to the bicentennial. So the problem was, how do we commemorate it and have an exhibit that stayed relevant past the date of the bicentennial, which is kind of what a lot of people were saying was going to be it. So were we going to put all that effort in just to have something for the 1 year? So initial solutions, which were interesting, was when I came on in 2017, it was right around the time that it was in March 2017, and the World War I exhibit went in April. So I came in really at the tail end, but I was one of, I think, 3 or 4 new staff members that had been there for less than 2 years. And Tiffany had been there less than 2 years at that point, right? Or 3 years?
I started in 14, the end of 14.
So it's been about 3 years. So we had to get staff buy-in on it. And we also had to figure out how, as a staff, we could work, because the dynamic that we were going to have would be different than the previous staff would have had. One of the first things that Tiffany and I kind of had a conversation about was setting a set length for the exhibit. So that was an initial solution where we knew that Pioneers idea would be the run from 2020 to 2025. And then we needed to have something following up. So instead of going from, we're planning one exhibit and then immediately having to plan the next one, we had a little bit of breathing room. And then the other big thing that we did with this one was linking up the exhibit themes with our broader interpretation programs and giving all staff an opportunity for input on the themes earlier and often, because we had kind of been, tailgating ideas. There wasn't a lot of time for that to kind of naturally breathe. And then we had more staff turnover in 2018 when Sophie came on. And so I had we were fortunate to have Sophie, because then I could throw these huge ideas at her and distill them down. And so the main one was Pioneers, and that one got reworked into Trailblazers, and we'll go through that. The other big one was the timeline, which we had come up with, which just kind of took on a life of its own. But its initial idea was kind of a combination of what ended up happening in Trailblazers with rotating themes, but also having a static timeline to commemorate the statehood and the pre-statehood life of Missouri. So I think that's enough setting the stage. So I'll let Sophie kind of kick off here on the timeline.
Okay, so as Jamie mentioned, they had this kind of anniversary problem, and I came on in October 2018 when a lot of ideas had kind of already had a little bit of meat to them, but weren't completely fleshed out yet. And one of them was the timeline. And I came on board and, I was kind of informed we want to create a bicentennial timeline that has all these dates that talk about Missouri over the last 200 years. We want it to be able to kind of change over time, and we wanted to have an interactive component. And that was basically it. So I got to just kind of stare at a wall for, a while and just be like, how do I make this something that is changeable, that is fun, and that can be interactive? And, I was kind of sitting there one day and was like, what if we make it illustrated? And what if that's how we make it a little bit more fun and inviting? Because, timelines can be very static and very kind of bland if you don't have something to kind of bring you into them. And it was going to be 80 feet long. So how do you make that something that makes people go, what is that? I want to look at that, and I want to look at the whole thing. And so, I talked to the team about it, and they're like, yes, let's figure out how we can make this illustrated. And so we started looking at illustrators and landed on Dan Zetlock, who is out of St. Louis and had worked with other museums before, like the Missouri History Museum. He did an exhibit with them, and it also worked with other cultural institutions when AAM was in St. Louis several years ago. And so what you're looking at are the first 3 sketches that Dan sent to us for this timeline. And there were 3 kind of different ideas that he had of how it could look. And so we got to look through those, make some decisions, and we landed on one that kind of looks like the top one. We wanted something that could fit literally as many things in it as possible. So our only kind of main idea was that we wanted the timeline to be a river, because rivers are obviously a big theme in Missouri in general. And, they're always kind of moving forward, and, a timeline is obviously passing through time. But other than that, we wanted it to be filled with all the symbols and people and things that represent Missouri. And Dan, was up to the challenge. So if you flip to the next one, these are the next kind of 3 drafts that we got from Dan. We kind of just let him go crazy, and he did. He did a lot of research and basically was just like, how many things can I fit into this piece of art? And while he was doing that, we were working on how can we make this dynamic and changeable over time, and how can we, draw visitors in and interact with the timeline. And so what you'll see are these kind of 3 white boxes that turn into transparent boxes that in the final one are kind of have disappeared, but have blank space for nothing. There's kind of nothing there. And what we came up with were these tiny timelines. And our tiny timelines would be these themed, smaller timelines where we could go in and talk more in depth about very specific themes in Missouri history, whether that be sports, natural disasters, conflicts, famous Missourians, whatever we decided we wanted to do. But they could be up for a specific amount of time, and they could be changed out and put in with something different. So 2 of these kind of tiny timelines would serve as a way for us to make this timeline changeable. So in 5 years, you can come back and still learn something new, even if you've seen the timeline a couple of times already. And then the final tiny timeline would be where our interactive component came into play. And Jamie actually came up with this idea of kind of having a create your own timeline aspect to the exhibit. And so we had Dan create a blank version of the timeline, just the river and the background scenery. And then we created magnets out of all of the illustrations in the timeline. So there's like 112 different magnets. And people can create their own version of the timeline. It could be real, it could be imaginary, it could not even be an actual timeline. You could just create a nice landscape. But it was a way for people to kind of mix around and play with this idea of history and what it means to them and what makes them think about their own stories right here in Missouri. So if you flip to the next slide. This is the wall and that the timeline went on. We worked with Brown Printing here in Jeff City to print the timeline. They were also up for the challenge. And it took them about 4 hours to put the timeline up, which was crazy, but it was really fun to see that timeline go up in pieces and kind of see, almost like time flowing backwards. But it was a really magnificent process. So we just kind of covered up World War I, sadly. We couldn't salvage our World War I images, but we switched it out with basically what I had really intended was to create a different tone and different mood. So World War I was much more serious and somber, as it should be. And I wanted the timeline to be bright and inviting and hopefully kind of fun. So if you flip to the next page, this was the final result. So in the middle, you can see kind of overhead. It's kind of small, but that's the entire timeline. It's 80 feet long. It's, I think those walls are 7 feet tall. And you can see it would take you a lot of time to read every single thing on the timeline. There's over 100 different dates. And Dan did a fantastic job of representing each and every single one of them. It starts with, you know, early prehistory and goes all the way up to the last thing we have on our timeline is COVID-19. So it's a very relevant exhibit. We were able to kind of keep including things, and we finally had to say stop because our last thing was supposed to be the Chiefs Super Bowl win, and then COVID-19 hit. And so we were like, we probably need to add that too. But it's hopefully something that will still remain fresh in a couple years since it'll be up for a while, and will make people want to keep coming back for more. So then our Trailblazers exhibit, oh, actually, no, sorry. These are the tiny timelines that I was talking about. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen is an almost finished one. So you can see we would just unscrew one end of our timeline, and then we can pull out from the reading rail and switch it out with something new when the time is right. And then on the bottom, you can see the magnet interactives. You can see a bunch of little kind of circles with tiny pictures in them, and that's the magnets, so people can do their own thing. And then we also decorated our reading rails with postcards from our own collection, just to kind of give a little bit more something else interesting to look at, since we're talking kind of about traveling down the river. Our postcards kind of are pictures of different places throughout Missouri. So just another little addition to the timeline to bring it all back to Missouri. So then we can talk about Trailblazers. So when I came on, Trailblazers was called Missouri Pioneers, I believe. And all I knew is that we wanted it to focus on pioneers of technology, pioneers of literature, pioneers of whatever. But I mean, I think that was basically it. You know, we hadn't really flushed anything else out. And, you know, Jamie kind of was just like, here you go, here it is. That's what this exhibit's supposed to be. And so I kind of went out, we did some visitor evaluations to see, you know, what kind of names do you like when you hear Pioneer? What does that make you think of? When you hear Trailblazer, what do you think of? And we landed on using Trailblazer. That seemed to be what visitors responded best to when thinking about somebody blazing a trail. And then, you know, the next thought was, well, what is a trailblazer? What are we considering a trailblazer? And so we kind of went through that process, talking about that, and landed on it's somebody in or from Missouri who has done something that has affected the way we live today, whether that's past or positive or negative. You know, whether that be inventing something that we all use, or reading or writing something that we all continue to read and enjoy, or entering a new field as, you know, a person that has never been in that field before, and opening doors for others to follow. And other than that, that was kind of it. I knew I wanted to have as many people and places and things in it as possible to show just how incredible the last 200 years of Missouri history has been. And I wanted it to be people that we don't always think about when we think about famous Missourians. So we made the decision to leave out everybody that was in the Hall of Famous Missourians, which if you've ever been in the Capitol building, they're on the 3rd floor rotunda, and it's, you know, people that you always think of, Mark Twain, Harry Truman, George Washington Carver, Scott Joplin, all of those that we already really know and love and appreciate. So we kind of pushed those aside and dug in to see who else can we talk about. And once we kind of had that figured out, then we had to start focusing on the design aspect. And once again, World War I, as you can see in these pictures, was, you know, very serious, dark, somber, as it should be. It's a exhibit commemorating war. And I wanted Trailblazers to be literally the exact opposite. I wanted it to be fun and bright and inviting. And, you know, because we are commemorating and in a way celebrating our state. And so Jamie also was like, why don't we use an illustrator again? We really loved working with Dan. Why don't we do it again? Let's work with a different illustrator. And so we found an illustrator out of Kansas City named Elizabeth Badley, who focuses on children's books. And we thought of this idea of making Trailblazers a book kind of theme. So it's supposed to be like you're walking into a book. And so you'll see kind of the first sketches from Elizabeth on what those panels would look like of a book. We wanted it to feel like the characters were leaping off the pages, and we wanted it to be fun. And everything was book related. So we had this idea of creating these large books that would go on the wall that people could flip through. We thought of, having all of our Trailblazers in what we called an index that you could flip through and see just little snippets of what they did. And then of course, bright and fun colors. And Elizabeth was really up for the challenge, and she blew us all away with her final product. So they're gorgeous. So we have 6 panels from her. Every section of the exhibit related to a book. So we had an introduction, we had a prelude where we just kind of gave a quick overview of how Missouri became a state, similar to how you would read in a novel. That kind of sets the stage, right? Your prelude sets the stage. And then each subsequent chapter would be themed to the type of people you would find in, or places and things that you would find in it. So chapter 1 is our kind of change makers, politicians, activists, teachers, people like that. Innovative geniuses is like technology, scientists, agriculture, anything like that. And then creativity was anything cultural. So literature, music, art, sports, things like that. And then an epilogue where we kind of wrap it all up. And so they're all color coordinated, and it was already just a complete turnaround from the World War I exhibit. So yeah, and then here are the final books. The books were challenging and trying to figure out how we could get them on the wall and they would be sturdy and live up to children, throwing them back and forth and last for a while. And so you can see some people reading them here. We kind of got creative with how to make them. And so these will actually change out. So this is how we would be able to fit as many Trailblazers in the exhibit as possible. So these will, throughout the 5 years, will change out with different Trailblazers and have different books. So every time you come in, theoretically, there'll be a different Trailblazer that you can read their book about. And then we also realized that our exhibit was very two-dimensional, where there's a lot of writing, there was a lot of reading, but there wasn't a lot of things that kind of brought you out from the wall. And so as an interactive component to the exhibit, we kind of came up with these desks that would be themed to each of the chapters. So you can kind of see they look a little different. One kind of looks like an office desk. One is a draft table, one's a metal desk, and each of them would have tabletop games on it. So I created these kind of collages to go on top of the desks, and all of the things in the collage relate to the Trailblazers. So there's like music sheets and posters and letters, things like that, that all relate to our Trailblazers. And then there's an individual game that fits with the theme. So there's a game that's like Trivial Pursuit, there's a game that's like Candyland and Innovatorland, and then a game that's like Pictionary. And each of those gives our visitors a chance to have a little bit of fun, but also continue learning in a different way that's not just reading panels on a wall. And then finally is our Trailblazer Index. So this was how we kind of got a digital aspect into the exhibit, which is something that we don't always have a chance to do. So this was fun for us. We worked with Firehouse Designs also, I think they're in Jeff City. And so we had them create these iPads for us, and the pictures that you see are what you would see on the iPad. So you can flip back and forth, and they're just these really quick cards that give you just the real basic information of all of the Trailblazers. So when they were born, when did they die, what's their connection to Missouri, and what did they do, why are they in the exhibit, and then a picture. And then I think I just have pictures. So this is the final product. So this is kind of just some pictures of what the exhibit looks like. So you can see it's bright, it's a lot more colorful than our World War I exhibit, and hopefully sets a little bit different tone than World War I. So we put those Elizabeth panels on these pop-ups to kind of also bring them out from the wall. And then we have the books, and of course, artifacts, which Kate will talk about here in a minute. I think I have a couple more pictures. Cool, yes. And then finally, our epilogue, this space was actually a theater space. It was the Trench Theater, so you could watch some propaganda videos in a World War I exhibit. And we struggled with trying to figure out what we wanted to do with this, and landed on a children's library. So this space, to continue our book theme, has about 25 different children's books that all relate to Missouri Trailblazers, or are even written by some of our Missouri Trailblazers. And then just spaces for people to sit and read. We also have blank versions of Elizabeth's panels so people can color or draw or write, just kind of a nice reflection space to kind of wrap everything up. I don't think, hopefully I didn't miss anything, but that's all I got.
And so I'm just going to interject here. So not only did we challenge Sophie with kind of developing or really fleshing out what the idea was going to be, we challenged Kate to help us find artifacts for such an eclectic or wide-ranging or wide scope kind of exhibit. And so we wanted to have her kind of talk about how we identified artifacts for specific Trailblazers or to Missouri history and things like that.
Yes, so this was a very challenging exhibit. I am an oddity among our staff right now. I am the only one that's been here for the last 3 large exhibits. So I started before the Civil War exhibit, got that on board, stayed through World War I, and now Trailblazers. So just to jump back a little bit with the Civil War and World War I exhibits, like Tiffany said, the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Hall was our original purpose. And so we had a built-in collection. We had the state's battle flag collection. So we had that premier core collection to use in those exhibits that would draw people in, that to be that thing. And while there are big gaps in the rest of our military collection that concerned us and posed some issues, we knew we had that visual artifact that would get people there and that they would remember, that they definitely wouldn't go away disappointed, no matter what we had in other cases. So when we got to Trailblazers, and we, you know, this is the broadest themed exhibit that we've done in my 14 years here. And so, and like Sophie said, we really were kind of overwhelmed with the possibilities of even a theme for it. And so when they said, we're going to do Trailblazers, and they're going to be lesser known people, not Walt Disney, not, you know, the people that you normally think of, we're going to spotlight some of these lesser known Trailblazers. I was like, great. That's a lot of names. That's a lot of places and organizations. And if they're lesser known, is that going to mean it's harder to find the thing to put in the exhibit? So yes, there was a lot of anxiety around the development of this exhibit for me. So what we did when we started out, of course, we had the names, and we actually had divided up the research among multiple members of our staff. It wasn't just the 4 of us that you see here today, but our interp staff and our part-timers really stepped up and helped us research all of these people. And so they were encouraged to, if they found a great repository that had stuff related to them, whether it was archival materials, photos, or actual objects, to note that in their write-ups so that I could then take that and have a jumping off point. I took all that, their notes, and just started Googling these people and tried to find everything that I could, and made a Excel spreadsheet of what was possibly out there and whom to contact related to it. And then I did a deep dive into our collection, and I really had to get out of the mindset that we needed that thing that really connected to the Trailblazer, and start to look at what might be more tangentially related or broadly related. And that's when I found things like the little button over here in the corner on the left-hand side, which is the Missouri State Horticultural Society, which actually connects back to George Hussman of Herman, who really started Missouri's wine industry. He was connected to the founding of that society. So while this isn't George Hussman's button, it at least, connects to him and his impact on the state of Missouri. Then we did look at if there was anything we could buy. We don't have a huge budget for purchasing of artifacts, but every once in a while we do make some purchases. And we went on eBay, and Red Fox, his big break into the scene was these Laugh of the Party comedy records. And I found one of the original ones fairly cheaply on eBay. So we made that purchase. Dick Gregory is another Missourian that was known for his comedy, but then got into more activism. And we found this button from when he ran as a write-in candidate for president. Nellie Dawn, famous clothing designer from Kansas City. Unfortunately, we didn't have any clothes from her in our collection. So we went on eBay. I really would have loved to find one of her handy dandy aprons that really made her a trailblazer and got her career going, but those are hard to come by. So we found this very lovely dress and purchased it for not a lot of money and added it to the collection. And we're also going to work with MU. They have some of her clothes and aprons. So we'll not only have our dress here, but some other things from her. But we talk about pioneer radio stations in Missouri. Well, how do you represent a radio station? Well, we have a lot of old radios, so it doesn't tie directly to that station, but it's still a cool radio from the era. I think it draws people in. We talk about Henry Kirkland, who was a Black farmer or horticulturalist, one of the first, the first Black professor at MU. Well, we don't have anything from him. Well, we have this really nice garden cultivator, and we put that on exhibit, and hopefully that will at least draw people over to it to read about Henry Kirkland. And therefore it's more about Henry Kirkland's story than what artifact is up. So yeah, we really scoured. Then the pandemic hit, and all these grand ideas we had for loans kind of got shot out of the water because it was harder to get a hold of people. Loans were taking longer to coordinate, and we were just running out of time. Also, the state DNR imposed travel restrictions for us, so I wasn't even sure if I could go to Kansas City to pick something up for the November opening. So the loans that we identified, we just tried to stick with mid-Missouri, and I think we got a few good things doing that. We got a cane head related to Blind Boone from the Blind Boone Foundation in Columbia. William Woods loaned us Helen Stevens' tracksuit and a few other things. But then, once you get out of your head that you have to have the thing, the epitome of things, and you just go with what you have, then you have to figure out how to make it work in a case. And as you can see from just these pictures, there's a lot of flat things in this exhibit, some of them which are monotone things. And I was like, oh my goodness, we've done all this work and now we just have going to be these flat, boring cases. So I just did what I could to play around with it using different mounts, real cheap mounts, plexiglass and plate stands, and just to give it different heights and make it pop a little bit. Filling in with the generic typewriter for the cultivators of creativity up here. filling in with a modern newspaper, you know, the Call is one of our Trailblazers. Well, we didn't really have anything historic, so I asked somebody in Kansas City to get us a copy of the Call, and she sent us that week's paper. The spaceship, or the Mercury model over here, we weren't sure how we were going to mount that. We weren't sure what to do with it. Thankfully, it stayed standing pretty good, just stuck down with some museum wax, but still we wanted to make the case more dynamic. So that's just a large format printer that Sophie, or print a photo that Sophie found on the internet and printed, and it's stuck to the back of the case with museum wax, and it gives that a little bit more of a dynamic look there than just you know, this thing standing in the middle of a case. So I think, is that my last? Yeah, that's my last slide. So yeah, we really had to rework what we thought was important for people to see and humble ourselves a little bit that we had some, you know, cool things and people would like it, whether it was related to directly to them or to our Trailblazer or not. And if you have any questions, I'm sure the four of us will be happy to answer them.
Yeah, feel free to put questions in the chat. And
Hey,
I did
Jamie,
yeah.
can I interject something? Because Kate kind of brought it up. You know, the museum is, and we're not going to go into it, but the museum is really well known for its flag collection and flags and banners. And the problem with moving away from war is that we really didn't have a good showcase for doing that or showcasing those things. And when you have a premier collection, you feel like you need to be exposing the public to some of it. So it did spawn another new exhibit. We feel like we've like redone the entire history hall like 5 times this year, because we did also add an exhibit called Memory and Cloth, where we showcase 1 or 2 of our premier collection every six months or so. But one of the things we did with that was take a different look at it, because in the past they had been showcased in the context of the war in which they were related, be it Civil War or World War I. And with our new exhibit that's just a flag exhibit, essentially, is how do we tell the story of the flag, but also ask questions about how our perspective on those flags and banners have changed over time. So it gives us not only a way to showcase those outside of an anniversary, but also to ask questions that we might not be able to ask or answer in the context of the Civil War or the context of World War I. So it's been kind of a different view. And yet we are still celebrating an anniversary, because our first couple of rotations, our first rotation in the Memory and Cloth exhibit is related kind of tangentially to the bicentennial. So we can't totally escape that, but it was a creative way to kind of look at that premier collection in a different context. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah. And, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kate.
And one other thing, like when we're talking about celebrating the state's 200th anniversary, I was like, but doing it from a focus of Trailblazers, there was a lot of other things that happened in Missouri history that we were not going to be covering in this exhibit. And I was like, but hey, wait, we actually have a great artifact for that thing. And so how we solved that was in the center of the history hall, we have put standalone cases that can rotate, and they pull out some of the themes from the timeline. So we didn't, obviously Trailblazers, we're not going to be talking about dinosaurs and the fossils from pre-Missouri, but in that case we did. We pulled out some mastodon bones and put them on display. We have Governor McNair's, the first governor of Missouri's rifle, which, you know, how do you have the Bicentennial without displaying that, but yet it doesn't fit in Trailblazers? So it fits nicely there in the timeline. We pull those themes out of the timeline and feature them. And so that was kind of how we got around and could get some of our other cooler stuff out on display as well.
Yeah, that's the great thing about the timeline is it really serves as a background for so many other things. We hope that our interp staff, as COVID kind of settles and more people come into the Capitol, can use it as a background to talk about various points in Missouri history, but it's also a nice background for us to pull out our artifacts and relate them to Missouri history. So it's really been more than I think any of us really even imagined it would be.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, and we can get to questions. And Beth, thank you for telling everybody to go check it out while you were in the Capitol today. But a couple of things that I just wanted to touch on, because I really did want to give a lot of credit to everybody involved. And like Kate had mentioned, one of the things that we did with this one was during World War I, we were still writing content as we rotated it. And one of the things that Sophie did an excellent job with, and with a lot of help from the staff, was doing the majority of the research up front, so that writing the content, it takes away that one step of having to go find it and start from scratch every single time you do a new Trailblazer. So we had that all mapped out from day one, which I think was just, such a smart thing. And then to the points that were just mentioned, yeah, I think we're still dealing with the anniversary problem, but I think we kind of flipped it on its head. So it's not really a problem now, it's really kind of the solution. So we're looking at these anniversaries and how they're connected to other things and the way that we can build out from them. So the timeline's one example. What's it called? The Histories in Cloth, is that it? Memories in Cloth?
Memories in Cloth.
Yeah, and how that can connect to the collection and all that. And so that was one of the interesting things, and one of the things that I think kind of happened organically through the process, which was nice to see. And then finally, I think one of the first things that Sophie did that kind of just has rung true throughout the entire process was really changing the tone. The backdrop of the Capitol is just kind of somber because of our museum exists in a space that was not meant for a museum. It was meant to be the Capitol. And so using the illustrators and the colors and the graphics and things to kind of set it, you don't really have to create a new space to make people feel that they're in a different type of environment. And that was one thing that happened a little bit in World War I, but like because of the age of the Capitol and the tone of the exhibit, it all kind of blended together a little bit. And then this one is just completely, for a bad pun, it jumps off the page at you for our storybook theme. So, but yeah, if anybody has any questions, we're happy to kind of talk through that. Otherwise, thank you so much for being today. And if you have questions or if you have artifacts for Kate, I'm sure she would love to have contacts for stuff. Yeah, Kate's excited. So, but yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I put everybody on mute, so if you've been trying to talk, sorry, but I didn't want to have any audio issues. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions. So as they say,